Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining so promptly at 5 p.m. and welcome to the first HE Plus Roundtable of 2025. Today, our roundtable is going to focus on bridging the gap. So any questions you've got about preparing for university, we'll go over in more depth later on the types of questions that you can ask. And we've got 5 panelists with us today from a variety of science, technology, engineering and math subjects at the University of Cambridge, ready to answer your questions. Just going to give a couple more minutes for the rest of the audience to arrive, and then we will crack on with the Q&A. Okay, I see we've got about 220 people on the call. We're expecting around 500, but I'm going to get started and then people will continue to arrive as we go through. So the purpose of today's session is for you guys to be able to meet some current undergraduate students studying STEM subjects at the University of Cambridge and to ask whatever questions you have about preparing for university and specifically about studying STEM courses. Now you can do that using the question function on the side panel. So once we get around to the Q&A section of the presentation, I will open the floor for questions and I will start sifting through the questions in the question box. What I will aim to do is ask the most frequently asked questions and anything that I think would be really useful for the majority of the audience. I can't promise to get around to everybody's question because there are hundreds of people on this call, and so we will do our absolute best to answer the most burning questions. And then if your question doesn't get answered, please do not take that as a personal affront. Right, okay. So when we're thinking about applying for university, our thinking tends to be divided into 2 stages. Now, I've put a diagram on the board which kind of describes those 2 different stages. You guys are in stage 1 at the moment in terms of where you are in the application cycle. So you're probably thinking about your options, choosing a course, choosing a university. If you're thinking about applying to Cambridge, potentially choosing a college, and then you're thinking about starting to prepare to study that course at undergraduate level, looking at super curricular resources and reading and building up to making your application. Stage 2, which comes a little bit further on in the application cycle, you'll be thinking about making your application, crafting your personal statement, student finance, all of the nitty-gritty stuff of actually applying, and then your next steps and beyond. So really preparing for the transition to university, potentially living alone in a new place. So today, hopefully, our questions are going to be focused around stage 1 of the process. So thinking about choosing a course, narrowing down your options, etc., and then starting to prepare for university. Okay, so we have got 5 lovely panelists today who are all undergraduates studying STEM subjects at the University of Cambridge. I'm going to hand over to our panelists to kind of introduce themselves to you and share what A-level subjects they did. So if we start with Afrin, you are the first on the left-hand side of the screen, and then we'll work through in that order.
So my name's Afrin. I'm a 4th year student who studies engineering, and the A-levels that I did are maths, further maths, physics and economics.
Perfect. Hannah.
Hi, so yeah, I'm Hannah. I'm also a 4th year. I'm studying medicine, and the A-levels that I studied are on the screen there: biology, chemistry, physics, English, literature and Japanese.
Great. Michelle?
Hello, I'm Michelle. I am a 2nd year maths student at Cambridge, and my A-levels were maths, further maths, physics and computer science.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Azina.
Yeah, hello everyone, my name's Alzina. I'm a 4th year engineer. I took maths, further maths, physics and German for my A-levels.
Fabulous. And my apologies, Mal, you are last but not least, not Azina.
That's fine. Hi, I'm a third-year veterinary medicine student, and I did the IB program. So my subjects were chemistry at high level, biology high level, math high level, Japanese B at high level, and then philosophy at standard level, and English A language and literature at standard level.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for those really clear introductions. So as you can see, we've tried to recruit from a variety of STEM subjects, and we've also got quite a variety in the A-level subjects that our panelists have studied. So hopefully that gives you some breadth and ability to kind of relate to one or other of our panelists in terms of the questions that you're asking. Okay, so our final slide before we move into the actual Q&A section of the session is just to give you some ideas, thoughts, guidance about the types of questions that you might want to ask our panelists. So you might want to think about A-level choices, potentially university choices, open days, course decisions, things like entry requirements. If you've got any really specific questions about entry requirements to particular courses, I won't put those questions to our panel, just because what's the best thing to do is just check the university or college website for that particular course. Things around learning at university, work experience, personal statements, supercurriculars, extracurriculars, the list goes on. So you can ask something about any of the topics you see on the screen. You can also ask questions about topics that you don't see on the screen. This is not an exhaustive list. So yeah, feel free to start posting your questions into the question box now, and I will try my best to put most of them to our lovely panel. Okay, we've already got lots of questions come through. Let's see if we can start with one that I can put to. Okay, right, so this one is relevant to quite a few of our panelists. Someone asks, does taking 3 A-levels hinder your chances of being accepted into Oxford or Cambridge? Anyone like to start with that question?
I mean, I did 4 A-levels, but I know some students who study right now chemical engineering, and they only took 3 A-levels. So don't feel like you're doing less. It's more just, at the time I was taking my A-levels, I just had the capacity to do another one. So if you're not doing one, that's okay. And a lot of people I know, especially in engineering, well, most of them take further maths, but sometimes there was that same student who studies chemical engineering. She took 3 subjects, and then she realized in year 13 that she needed AS further maths, and luckily that was an option at her school. So she ended up taking 3 A-levels. In year 13 she realized, oh, I need AS. So if that's also an option, you can give that a go.
Okay, interesting. Does anybody else have any thoughts on the benefits of 3 A-levels versus more than 3?
I can say something. So yeah, I did more than 3, but depending on the subject, your offer might only be for 3. So the offer that I was given, I only had to get grades like A stars A's in biology, chemistry, physics, and I could have failed the others and it wouldn't have mattered. So it sort of depends on your subject and also on the college. And I think a lot of you, like they do understand that now a lot of sixth forms and colleges aren't even offering 4. So some of it does depend on where you are.
Absolutely. Did anybody, other members of the panel, get an offer based on 3 A-levels?
Yeah, so if I were to be a bit more subject specific for maths, they only look at 3 A-levels, and depending on what college you apply to, it really depends on what college you apply to, and you're typically going to be given a conditional offer conditioned on you getting an A star in maths and I think 2 A stars and an A. So they completely don't care about your 4th A level. So it's completely, well, at least for maths, I don't think you actually need a 4th A level. But obviously, if you're able to do it, then sure, go ahead, because it's, well, perhaps fun to just look at another subject. But it definitely is not a sort of prerequisite to do 4 A levels instead of 3.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I think in general, Cambridge offers for the majority of highly selective and Russell Group universities are made on the basis of 3 subjects. if you need to do further maths, for example, to access your course, then that is usually advisable. But 3 A levels definitely doesn't hinder your chances of getting into Oxford or Cambridge. And in many cases, students do more than 3 A levels following a passion or formalising their learning in something they already have expertise in. So, for example, taking a language at A level. Does anyone have any experience of that?
I mean, yeah, so I took Japanese A level, and that was just because I already spoke Japanese, and so it's quite a nice thing for me to do. But equally, it wasn't because I thought I had to do it to get into uni or anything like that. And I guess another thing to mention is the reason why I also did English literature was because at the start of year 12, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do at university, and I thought that if I do humanities as well as some science, I can keep my options open. So if that hadn't been the case, I might have only done 3. Yeah.
Okay, fab. Right, so we've had some questions come through about how you chose your course. So what drew you to the subject that you study today? So if we start with Mal for this one.
Yeah, of course. So I chose veterinary medicine because, well, I knew I've always wanted to sort of work with animals. So for me, it was quite straightforward. I knew I wanted to do veterinary medicine, and I chose my subject sort of to prepare myself for veterinary medicine. So yeah, in that sense, for me, it was a very straightforward path, choosing what subject I wanted to study.
Okay, fab. Michelle?
Yeah, it was also pretty straightforward for me because I knew from a very young age I really like abstract maths. Like I really liked the idea of abstracting real life sort of concept into just ideas about perhaps numbers, perhaps shapes, or just concepts flying around. And it sort of just is pretty natural to me to apply to maths because that's exactly what maths is.
Okay, fantastic. So an intrinsic love of maths. Lucky you. Afrin?
I I did GCSE product design, and that was kind of my first taste of something similar to engineering. And I realized I really like doing design work. I had like an okay ability to do like maths and physics. So I was kind of like, well, it seems like a good option, but I'd left my options open at A level, in case I wanted to do something more economicsy, in the future. But then as I was kind of going through sixth form, I kind of confirmed to myself that engineering was what I liked. In all honesty, like when I was trying to find things for my personal statement and I was doing like reading around cool things that I liked in engineering, that really kind of helped me confirm to myself that was what I liked. Yeah, that was kind of it.
Okay, lovely. Arzina?
So in year 11, our school just randomly put out there that there's this Arkwright engineering sort of program that existed, and I didn't know whether or not I wanted to do engineering, but I just went for it and I got it. And even after getting it, I didn't really know whether I still wanted to do engineering. And then at school, like maths was just like my strongest subject, like physics was my favorite, so I just thought maybe I'd just go into one of those two. And my dad said to go into engineering because it's a mixture of both. Obviously, you don't have to listen to your parents if they're telling you to do something that you completely don't want to do. But in that situation, I think I got some good advice from my parents. So yeah.
Okay, great. And finally, Hannah.
Yeah, like I said before, I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do at the start of sixth form, so I was exploring various different things I could do at uni. But I think the most helpful thing for me in deciding to do medicine was doing some work experience, because I think especially with something more vocational, it is really helpful to get a bit of more of an insight into what it would actually be like, which is quite hard to do unless you've had some experience, you've read some books about it. And so I think for me, it was just sort of learning more about what medicine would actually be like, and that helped me decide that, oh yeah, I do actually want to do this.
Okay, fantastic. So we've got a kind of mixture of people who have always known they wanted to study their subject, and then others who have kind of followed maybe a passion for a particular subject and found their way to the degree course, and then other people who've kind of taken their time and figured it out through more practical experience. It's a good range of experiences there. Okay, well, we'll return to the work experience question in a minute, because that is coming up quite a lot in the question box. But what I want to touch on first is, how did you make your choices about which university to apply to? And then when you chose to apply to Cambridge, how did you make your choice of college? So if we start with the university question, because we get 5 choices on our UCAS form, what influenced your decision making there? Does anybody want to jump in?
So for me, it really was a difference between taking the MAT and taking the STEP. And for people who are not familiar with these are the entrance exams for taking a math course at Oxford versus Cambridge. So I was I was wondering between the two, and I realized that I liked the STEP a bit more because there was a choice of questions. So you're allowed to choose the questions that you want to do, and um, and it's sort of and you take it with your A level, so it's in June, I think, of year 13, which gives you a bit more time to prepare. And I think that's the main reason why I chose Cambridge instead of Oxford. And like, I always thought Cambridge and Oxford, they're both aspirational choices, and for perhaps the other choices, I'll put the more sort of secure universities, although they're still perhaps very research intense and stuff. But the reason why I chose Cambridge is mainly because of the STEP exam.
Okay, and was
So
that common to some of the other unis that you were applying to? Or was it just a
yes,
specifically Cambridge?
I think it's specifically Cambridge and Oxford that has these sort of entrance exams. But yeah, I think it's more or less general. Like I would prefer like the STEP exam a lot more than the MAT.
Okay, does anybody else have that experience of choosing universities based on a pre-application assessment?
I also decided between Oxford and Cambridge in that way. So for engineering, there is a entrance exam that we have to do. When I was doing it, it was called the ENGA, but now it's called the ESAT. And I did a paper for the Oxford one. The Oxford one has something called the PAT, which is physics admissions. So it's called the PAT. I'm not completely sure what it stands for. And I did one paper for the ENGA at my time, and I think I just like the ENGA more. Like there are some challenges to both, like with the ENGA or ESAT, you don't have a calculator, with the PAT you do, but generally I made the differentiation between Oxford and Cambridge in that way.
Okay, and then other factors that were influencing your decision. So pre-application assessment was one of the things you were thinking about. Were there any other things you were thinking about when you were making your 5 choices?
Yeah. When I actually I'd spread my choices relatively. I knew that I wanted to go to a university that did engineering well and had like good rankings as far as like research, was doing cool things, that kind of stuff. So I'd taken that into consideration in like picking my 5. I agree in the fact that I did choose it to be slightly tiered in the fact that so Cambridge was like my aspirational option, and then I had some which were like just below that, and then one or two which were like safer side like applications options to have, I guess. And when I'd chosen in choosing engineering at Cambridge versus Oxford, for example, or Cambridge versus elsewhere, one of the big things I looked at was the actual course content. So the Cambridge engineering course is slightly more practical design focused compared to the Oxford one. So the Oxford one is slightly more theoretical. You have a really good understanding, and that varies depending on the course that you're doing and so on and so forth, the option that you pick. So taking that into account and kind of speaking to people and teachers and that sort of stuff, my understanding was that because the Cambridge course was slightly more applied, and I enjoyed doing that slightly more applied design work, as well as so I knew that I always wanted to work within like the bio field, which is not necessarily something that all universities offer, but Cambridge does have a really good bio department, so that was kind of my another like consideration, I guess, when applying. yeah, all of those things combined kind of made me make the choices I did.
Okay, interesting. So Mal and Hannah, I know when you're applying for medical schools or vet schools, your choices are slightly more limited. So what were you guys thinking about when you were picking? Should we start with Mal?
Yeah, so actually, I only applied to Cambridge. So I only used one of those 5 UCAS choices. And the main reason for that really is because I didn't have time to do research into any other universities. Because I'm an international student from Sweden. So, and Cambridge, the website for Cambridge application was quite straightforward. It was easy to navigate, and it was really that kind of things that made me choose Cambridge.
Okay, great. And then Hannah?
Yeah, I mean, because of COVID, I didn't really get a chance to visit any of the unis, so a lot of it was based on online research and sort of just if I liked the look of the place as a city to live in. And then also part of it was based on how far they are from home. So I didn't want to stay in the city where I grew up, but equally, I didn't want to be more than sort of 1-2 hours away. And so that sort of limited my radius of where I would apply. And also because I have a brother the year above me who also studies the same course, and I didn't want to apply to any of the same unis as he did, so that sort of narrowed it down a bit further. So that's who I chose.
Yeah, that's a lot of restrictions, but I think that's quite a common sort of consideration for a lot of people when they're thinking about applying to universities. So proximity to home is often quite important. You mentioned open days. Did anybody get the chance to go on an open day? How did you feel that they influenced your decision at all, if you did? Or were you all in the COVID years?
I was in the COVID years, but there was this online open day or online subject masterclass, more like that was at John's, which is like my current college, and I was suppose the reason why I chose John's and why I chose Cambridge is really it was the subjects masterclass was also a really big factor of that because well it was just really fun to listen to a professor speaking about maths enthusiastically in a sort of comprehensive way. Um, and yeah, it was a really nice experience, and I thought it would be really nice if I could go to this university, and well, here I am.
Okay, interesting. So whilst you didn't have a physical experience, the kind of like online subject taster experience was really important.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to jump in on that one about open days or subject tasters?
Yeah, so I managed to come for an open day right before everything shut down for COVID. So like the start of March in 2020. We had like an engineering taster day, where we did like a lecture at the engineering department, and then we had like a couple of tours, and we spoke to students and things like that, and then we had like some college tours with like and getting to speak to people. That was kind of what it was, and I think it was very good in understanding what the kind of work was like. So the lecture that we got given was about how DNA can be used as a storage medium, which was it's something that you don't particularly think you would learn in engineering. But the professor that was there was really good, and he kind of explained things really well. It was just an interesting subject altogether. So like just even just piquing my interest in that way was like it made me realize that engineering is definitely what I wanted to do, and some of the best research in engineering happens here. Some of the coolest things in engineering happen here, and it kind of signed me on even further. I think it's also that's what influenced. We did. I don't remember if we did a. I don't think we did a tour of cats, but when walking past cats, lots of students had good things to say, which is part of the reason why I chose St. Catherine's as my college.
Okay, so kind of in summary, open days are great, online lectures and tasters are great, but you can also learn a lot about university from just doing online research and reading about what other students have to say. Okay, fantastic. So I think we'll go back to the question around work experience now. So which of our panelists did do some work experience before applying to university? Okay, so we've got Mal and Hannah. Right, you guys, and this is directed at you. Hannah, do you want to start? How did you find your work experience? I know you've already said your work experience was a really sort of affirming in terms of your choice of course and things like that. So can you just talk us through a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think it's important to say, especially for medicine, that people do understand that it is hard to get work experience, especially in the hospital or GP environment. So don't worry if you can't. But I did manage to. So basically, a lot of hospitals do run, especially the larger ones, they run specific work experience programs that you can apply through. But the local hospital for me didn't. So I just found a bunch of numbers on the website, which I called for different doctors. And one of them was kind enough to give me a week, sort of shadowing him and his colleagues. So that was really helpful for me to have an insight into medicine. But I think for medicine, work experience is important because it sort of helps you to see if the job is for you. But also, I think that on a sort of broader scale, it sort of shows your commitment to medicine. So things like volunteering, especially longer term, in any kind of capacity is quite important because I think it helps to show your commitment on a longer term, but also it shows that you're sort of interested in helping people. So it can be anything like, so I worked in a care home for a bit, I volunteered at sort of a hospital serving teas and coffees. I volunteered in the special educational needs department with younger children in my school. So there's just various different opportunities you can do. And I think often people already are involved in something, whether it's, coaching younger students in sports or anything like that. So yeah, I'd say there's those two sides to help for you to sort of show a commitment to medicine, but also for you to sort of get an insight into whether medicine's for you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Mel?
Yeah, so I applied during the COVID era, so work experience was not really a requirement. I'm not sure what are the recommendations now, but I still got 2 weeks of work experience at a farm. So they had sort of typical farm animals, like cows, chickens, sheep, and that kind of things. And so I worked there for 2 weeks, and I learned some basic sort of animal handling skills. And then I also managed to see some like pathology, so like sick animals and that kind of things. And which I actually discussed in my Cambridge interview. So that's something that actually came up in my interview. But I think the biggest thing is I got to experience what it's like to actually work with animals. So it's not always, fun and cute and kind of cuddly. I got to also see different sides. So we had cases where, for example, a sheep gave a sort of like a miscarriage, and yeah, it's that kind of more serious side that we in veterinary medicine have to deal with. So I think that really gave me, yeah, I got experience there that was really valuable and prepared me for the veterinary medicine course. And also got to know what it's like to really work with animals every day.
Thank you. As a follow-up to that, somebody has asked, how did you incorporate your work experience into your personal statement when you were applying? What sort of things did you say about your work experience? What reflections did you have? Don't know if you want to start, Hannah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that for medicine, it's sort of all about reflection. And I think it's not so much the quantity of work experience that you have, or even, how hospital centered it is or anything like that, but it's more showing that you've reflected it, you've thought about it, you've learned things maybe that surprised you, you've been challenged in some ways by it. And I think it's just really personal to you. And I think, yeah, if you reflect on whatever experience you do have, and in an interview, often you're asked sort of, what surprised you about what you saw in your work experience or something like that. And I think that if you genuinely have seen things that have interested you, that have made you more passionate about medicine, things you've seen that you've been like, I don't understand why that's done, or that's not how I expected things to be, I think that's really important. And it's something that sort of, it doesn't stop at your application for university. It's a quality that they expect all doctors to have. There's something called reflective practice, and it's something that you continue to develop throughout your career. And it's sort of I guess, a big part of improving healthcare, seeing problems, addressing them, reflecting on why things have gone wrong, making sure they don't happen again, things like that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So it's not just something that you do to tick a box in your personal statement, it's actually a quality that they're looking for in all medical students that apply, and they're looking for you to develop that throughout your course. Is that your experience, Mal?
Yeah, so I was going to say I totally agree with Hannah, and that's what I wrote in my personal statement as well. So I kind of talked about what I did, and then I reflected on it. And one thing, I guess, for veterinary medicine that might be relevant is sort of what kind of animals you worked with, because when it comes to sort of just practical skills, animal handling skills, each animal's got like different ways of sort of handling, so that might be nice thing to mention. So instead of just like saying, oh, I worked at the farm, I specified which exact like species I've worked with.
Okay, fantastic. And just staying on the topic of kind of prep pre-application, we mentioned the STEP and also the ESAT's been mentioned. How did you guys prepare for your pre-application assessments, and do you have any advice for the specific papers that you took? Do you want to start, Michelle?
Yeah, so for the STEP, it's divided into two papers. The first, what we call Step 2 and Step 3. Step 2 is based on A-level maths, and Step 3 is based on A-level further maths. So clearly, an obvious way to prepare for this is to know your A-level material really well. So the way they ask questions is that they assume that you're already on top of your A-level knowledge, and they want to test you further to see if you can extend those concepts a bit, to see if you're really happy with sort of using them in a completely different way. So the first step to really, the first step to know to sort of prepare yourself for this exam is to actually know your A-level content. But then afterwards, it's always useful to do past papers. I would probably say I started from around Easter time in year 12, but that was pretty early. Most people will start from around the summer before year 13. And they would usually, so it's sort of it's actually a bit casual. You would just do a bit of past papers, do a bit of past questions, perhaps get stuck on something, return to it later, and perhaps have a bit of insight afterwards. Because these sort of things are the things that you have to, well, they're trying to prepare you to have a flexible mindset towards maths, to be able to use different tools that you currently have to solve problems. And that is exactly what a math degree is about. So it is pretty useful to actually practice doing these problems and to not get frustrated too easily, because it is usually the case where you have to stare at a problem for like around 20 minutes or even an hour before you actually get some insight from it. And I know it's very different from A levels, where you usually just perform algorithmically what the example or what your teacher told you to do, and that will probably give you all the marks that you need. But for STEP, it really is the process of thinking through a problem. And so I'll probably say practice thinking, practice using all sorts of A-level material, and just make sure that you actually know your A-level material.
And did you find that the STEP was good preparation for the type of learning that you do now at Cambridge?
Yes, exactly. For STEP, as I mentioned, it's a lot about thinking your way through a problem instead of like regurgitating whatever your teacher told you in class. And this is exactly the same as like the sort of lecture style learning here at Cambridge, where we might get material, we might get definitions, examples, or proofs from the lectures, but it's seldom the case where you're asked to reproduce a proof in the problem sheets. They usually will ask you to use the proofs or use ideas similar to the proofs, and sort of write out your own thinking towards a problem that they set you on a problem sheet. And that is the main bulk of a math student's day-to-day life at Cambridge, I suppose. So yes, indeed, if you're like preparing for STEP is essentially also preparing yourself for a Cambridge maths degree. So yeah.
Okay, so didn't feel like time wasted at all.
it definitely was not wasted.
No. Okay, fantastic. Let's go to our engineers now. I think Azina, you mentioned that the test was called something different, maybe formatted slightly differently when you did it. But what was your experience of preparing for that, and does it help you in terms of the work that you do now?
Yeah, so yeah, like when I said there was the ENGA, which have been going on for around 6 years. One thing to know if you are applying for engineering, the specification and the style of exam has been changing over the past few years. So I would recommend doing all of them for practice, but just beware that for now, some of the questions are different. Yeah, so like the main thing with this engineering entrance exam, you don't need to know all of your A-level content. By the time I'd done it, I'd only known AS, and that was enough. I've been told that these exams are made so that even if you just have GCSE knowledge and you can build on that, that's what you should be able to do. And that's like it's really similar to what Michelle said, is that once you have this knowledge, you need to be able to apply it in a situation that you probably won't get in an A-level question. So that's like a really important technique, and they like yeah, it's the same thing. It's like they don't want you to just do what your teachers tell you to do at school. You do have to practice. And the main thing with engineering is that when I was doing the papers, I realized I could do all the questions, but it's just mostly about timing that restricted people's performance. So it's definitely a good habit that when you do the past papers, to always do them in timed conditions. I'm not saying you'll be able to answer all the questions straight away on your first attempt. It's more just getting used to the fact that you're actually going to be under a lot of time pressure. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. And did you find that the problem-solving element of the paper got easier the more you practiced?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's like sometimes like initially you might have done it in one way, maybe when the first time you did your paper, but I remember by the time I was doing my third paper, I was using a completely different method, which just saved me a lot of time. So I think after some practice, you'll find some techniques that will help you save some time, skip some steps, and then your mental maths also gets a lot better, which I was really happy to achieve. So yeah.
Great. What about you, Ephraim? Was that your experience?
I think my main takeaway is definitely practice is the most important. Whether that's past papers, but also you can usually get like test prep books, which are kind of, and they'll usually have like more questions, that you can just kind of grind through, in like maybe like the summer before the entrance exams, that you can really kind of give some time to it. The main thing that I kind of took away from it, I don't know if it was similar to the work that we do within like engineering now, but more so like I think this like problem solving ability and like being able to take something that you know as a basic concept and apply it in a different way, or apply it in a situation which is new to you. That's kind of it's a common thread, I feel like, from like an interview or like once you get here. I think having this ability to problem solve in a space that you might not necessarily be familiar with is really important. um and I think that as well, it just comes with time and practice and like learning new things and skills, like Azina said as well. It very much is like you learn the little tips and tricks and you get better with time, and that it is exactly that. Yeah, that's kind of all. Whoops.
Okay, so it's not necessarily sort of mapping over exactly in terms of the style of work that you're having now, but the skills and the problem-solving element is a commonality. Okay, Hannah, we've had quite a few questions come through about the UCAT. I don't know if you sat the UCAT, because I think you did. Okay. People are asking, how did you prepare for that? How much time did you spend revising for it? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so I guess UCAT is a bit of an odd test because it's not really like anything you've done before, and some of these sections are a bit rogue, and obviously it's on a computer. So I think it does need a bit of getting used to, but I think also you don't need to spend ages and ages preparing, especially because you do have a lot of other things going on sort of at that time when you'll be sitting it, like whether you're doing work experience or sort of, you know, year 13 work, preparing for interviews, things like that. So yeah, I spent just over a month preparing. I found, so there's some mock exams, mock tests on the UCAT website, which they've set themselves, and those are quite good. There's only a limited number, but to space those out over your preparation is quite helpful, because they sort of give you a bit of a better picture of how you're doing, where you're at. I think taking one at the start is probably quite helpful to see where your beginning point is and to identify your weakest areas, and then you can specifically practice the bits that you find hardest as you go along. And I think also, this is reflections again, but I think that really reflecting on what mistakes you're making and what you're learning from as you do more practice questions is really helpful as you prepare. So if you've picked your weakest area and then you do some practice questions on that, and then you see that, oh, this is kind of, there's just this thing that I didn't realize, this is how it works, but now I know, and you can write that down in a notebook, and you sort of have a list of these different points that you've learned from. And sometimes just having a bit of a glance through that can really help things to stick in your mind. And in terms of actual resources I used a sort of online question bank, which was called Medify. I think there's probably various question banks you can use out there, and there's also sort of paper books and things. Although I think that if you can, it is helpful to do something that's online on a computer, because if that's the actual format of the exam, it's helpful to get used to the keyboard and where you click and everything like that, because actually those little things can make quite a big difference in terms of the timing in the exam itself, because it can be quite time pressured. Yeah, that's sort of an overview of what I'd say.
Okay, fantastic. I think timing is also emerging as a common theme when we're thinking about pre-application assessments. Any final comments on that before we move on? No, okay, fantastic. Right, the next set of questions is around supercurriculars, wider reading, sourcing that, how to reflect on that in our personal statements. So I think if we start top left and we start with Michelle, what sort of supercurricular research did you do? How did you incorporate it into your application?
Right, so I did this quantum club activity at Oxford that's held by like the physics department at Oxford, and that was like a course where they teach you quantum physics in their like sort of baby level, obviously as a year 12, and I wrote it as a sort of supercurricular, just because it was fun. It was also enlightening. It taught a bit of like extra maths that you probably wouldn't have seen if you didn't do that course. And I think in general the point of having supercurriculars is to show that you have a passion for that subject to the point that you are willing to give out some of your free time to sort of participate in this subject alongside with your A levels, which shows, it actually shows commitment, because you're actually paying the effort to do it. And even if you don't get into the course because it might be selective, you might have missed the deadline or for any reason, it's always possible to just read a book, or I don't know, watch YouTube, look at random math articles, and to sort of think what do you enjoy about this? Why do you like watching those type of videos? Why do you like reading that book? What has that book taught you in terms of I'm going to speak really math related, really math oriented, but like what that book has taught about has taught you to do in terms of math, in terms of the subject that you love. And also like another resource that you might be interested in is like the university, at least Cambridge, has a reading list. So it has like a suggested list of books that A-level students might be interested in reading. And the thing is, if you read just one book from that list, you have read on average one more book than the average applicant. So yeah, do give it a read. Just Google Cambridge math reading list and you'll see it. And yeah, they're generally nice. And I suppose yeah, I'm sorry. And I suppose the main thing of actually doing the supercurriculars is not to just quantitatively like say, oh, I've done this course, I've read that book, and write it in your personal statement. Well, anyone can read that book, anyone can do that course. I think the main thing is what you got from that course, like what are your reflections, what has it led you to explore further. Maybe you went into that course and you thought, oh, linear algebra looks insane, looks fun. I might do a bit more reading on that. It can be things like this. And yeah, hopefully that'll be some good advice.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you. Just out of interest, how much reading would you say you did as a percentage of your supercurricular exploration, and how much was other types of things?
As a percentage, so I read 2 books and sort of went to 2 courses. So if you were to, it's sort of like it's not half, I think. Like although it's like 2 + 2, like 2 out of 4, but the effort that I paid in, I'm sorry, the effort that I paid in, I would say perhaps 25% of my effort
Okay.
went into reading. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to go to the engineers next. What sort of supercurricular things did you guys do to prepare, and how did you include them in your application?
I was gonna say, I think I don't know if it was just because I was applying in a COVID year, but because we had less opportunities for like work experiences and things like that, I think we, at least in my school, we were kind of very much pushed to like make sure you ground like your learning in like academic literature, whether that's journals or like publications or like just academic literature in general, or also books. And I think reading academic literature is a good alternative to books where you might have to spend a very extended period of time reading that, compared to something that's maybe 20 or so pages, albeit technically dense, but sometimes that's a nicer way to go about learning something. What I will say is, and I think it took up a lot more of my personal statement. I want to say it was like 70% of like my personal statement was very much discussing the literature that I'd read. But the way that I'd phrased things was, for example, I had gone to this course, so I'd watched this online lecture, and that was my first introduction into this topic, and I learned more about it by reading these papers. And this is how, this is what I found out, and this is why it was interesting to me, so on and so forth. So like developing it in that way, I think is a good way to flesh out when you're answering questions in your personal statement. Yeah, as far as academic reading goes, I think in general, I think when looking for topics and like trying to find things, I think funnily enough, I think for engineering, I think YouTube videos were actually really good in finding cool things that existed out there. The other thing was, in secondary school, we had a science teacher that very much pushed the New Scientist magazines on us, which they're essentially magazines where they usually have like open source articles for some, but it will essentially detail some of the new developments that are happening within different fields of science. So depending on chemistry, biology, maths, physics, wherever it is, you can kind of go in and see like, oh, this is a new thing that's kind of in the area that's kind of cool. And then you do some reading around it, and then you go from there. So if you're just looking for ideas, I feel like it's a good place to start.
Okay, fantastic. So lots of different sort of variety in terms of the resources you're accessing. But I think the main theme coming through there was just sort of like follow a train of thought, follow your interest in a subject, and see where that takes you in terms of your supercurricular exploration. Okay, and I think the point that you made about the supercurricular reading being about 80% of your personal statement is an important one. Just when you're applying for a highly selective university, remember you're applying for an academic course. So what they really want to see is that you can demonstrate interest in your subject outside of the curriculum that you've been taught at school, and also just a passion for whatever it is you are signing up to study for 3, 4, 5, 6 years, however long your course is. Arzina, did you want to add anything to that?
So I know Michelle and Afrin have both talked about reading, but I didn't include any books in my personal statement, and I want to say that's okay. Like I did read a couple, but it ended up being that I didn't even mention those books in my statement. So like one thing I did was like a project, like I was working with 2 other people from my school and we were designing this aerospace project. Or there was one bit of work experience that I actually forgot about but realized just now. I did at the end of year 11, so luckily before COVID, and I was like, oh, I learned about fluids in this, and from fluids I learned about lift, and then from lift I learned about how aeroplanes work, then from aeroplanes I went to rockets. So like having some kind of chain is good, but just saying, if you don't have any books, you don't have to have them. It's good for your reading, but like, I don't know, as like coming into my degree right now, I don't think I've like picked up a book at all. Obviously like I read lecture notes and things, but like yeah, that in engineering I don't think it's as emphasized as in other courses.
Okay, I think that links quite nicely to a question that's come through, which I think if one person is asking, then multiple people on the call probably are asking the same thing. When we say academic literature, what do we mean? How can we answer that question from our different perspectives?
So on a mathematics point of view, academic literature will just mean research paper. So it would mean a paper based on a certain topic that maybe a researcher put in effort to discover something, or to prove a theorem or whatever that is. Yeah, so I would say academic literature in this sense would just be research paper.
Okay, interesting. Does anybody else have any other thoughts on what that can mean in the different contexts?
I mean, when I was applying, like, I didn't really know what a paper was, or like where you'd find a paper to read it. So I know people do say a lot about, oh, if you find a paper and read it, like it's not always that easy. And I think that's something I only sort of found more out about when I went to uni. But I think maybe for medicine it is a bit different, because like there are things that sort of come up in the news, and then you can sort of Google them and read a bit more about it, even without it being like a paper that then you critically think about and like, oh, what about like the sample sizes in this clinical trial? Like, I think that was just a bit beyond where I was at when I was applying. I mean, I'm sure some people did read that kind of thing, but I didn't. I looked at the news a bit, and also I think there's quite a lot of interesting medical books that are a lot more accessible. So that's sort of more what I did.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point to kind of end on there, that for some people accessing academic literature is not that easy, and also it can be quite daunting to read because it can be full of terminology, jargon, equations that you might not recognize, and that's okay. And there are other forms of supercurricular resources out there that you can access, like we've had YouTube videos mentioned, medical books that are kind of more open access and written in a slightly different style, might be more accessible. Mal, did you have anything to add on that before we move on to our, what I think will be our final topic?
I think that was summarized very, very well, and that's kind of what I did for my extracurricular as well. So I did some extra reading on canine oncology, which is like the study of cancer. But as you said, reading papers was quite daunting, and also a lot of academic papers out there kind of expect you to have certain level of knowledge already on that specific topic, and which I didn't have. So for me, it was more like watching videos and reading a bit more sort of accessible, medical books, as Hannah mentioned, that kind of things. And I probably did maybe enough sort of research to produce maybe 20 minutes presentation. That's the kind of sort of, extra reading I did in total. And for veterinary medicine, I think if you have any work experience, that's probably more relevant than extracurricular activities. So yeah, I didn't mention too much about sort of extracurricular stuff in my personal statement.
Okay, fantastic. So I think sorry,
if I just to clarify a little bit, because I feel like I've scared people saying academic literature, but there is a big variety when you search things, and it can be very much anything from like someone having a discussion based on a topic to like even just like articles or like just recounting, but it's more about, I think, once you find out about a certain thing that exists out there, so a project that might exist or so on and so forth, reading around it, not necessarily, like I said, there are technical papers out there, they're not like, it very much isn't needed, but more so when you get the gist of things that are related. I think it's kind of, but again, discussion articles, like people giving their opinion on things, again, very, very, very useful. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a really useful clarification. And there are quite a few questions coming through about where we find academic literature. So just to point you back to one of our previous webinars when we did our introductory sort of welcome to HE+, we talked a lot about different sources of supercurricular reading and research. I've been mentioned The New Scientist, things like JSTOR, where you can find open access articles online. There's lots of different things, so you can just revisit the slides for those to find some different sources for any supercurricular research that you're planning to do. Right, so the last set of questions I think are going to be themed around sort of transition to university, living on your own. What did you find most sort of difficult about that, and what was your sort of best discovery or experience about that? Should we start with Hannah?
Yeah, so I think I found the transition to university quite difficult. I think it depends on who you are as a person and sort of just your personality. So I think when I was in the summer before I left, I was sort of in denial. I was like, oh, I'm not leaving home. And then the day before I left, I was like, oh, I've got a pet. And I was like, I don't have anything I need. And I think it's just, if you haven't been to boarding school, I think that it's just very new, and suddenly you're on your own, surrounded by loads of different people. You're not really familiar with the place or with any of the people, and suddenly, as well as studying, you have all these other things you have to do, like remember to go shopping and remember what food you have and do your laundry. And I think amid all of that, it's quite easy to feel lonely and to miss home and be quite homesick. And I think I especially found that at the beginning. But yeah, I think it is a difficult time, but also it's quite enjoyable, because I think that I sort of got past that quite quickly. So it was quite bad at the beginning, but then actually I realised that there's all these new people I can be friends with, and there's all these fun things going on at university, and actually the independence is really quite enjoyable, because suddenly you can go out to dinner with whoever you want to go out to dinner with, and you can join whatever society you want to join. It's really easy to get around at university. You don't need to wait for someone to give you a lift. So yeah, I think it's okay to find it difficult, but also there's loads of good parts about it, and it's not something to be scared of. And there is help if you need it. And yeah.
That's a lovely, affirming and comprehensive answer, so thank you for that one. Does anybody else have any thoughts on the transition to university?
I could perhaps comment on the more academic side. So A-level or sort of school learning versus university learning is really like very different things. So when you go to university, it's more about you're sort of exploring the topic and you're sort of trying to get your head around stuff. And well, it's not, so in lectures, it's not like in school where you can raise your hand and ask the teacher whenever you're confused about something. You'll usually have to either go back and look at your notes, try to get your head around it, and perhaps if you still have, like, if you're still struggling, then maybe look for your supervisor instead of like so the main point really is like the lecturer is going to throw information at a really high speed for like 1 hour nonstop, and it might be daunting at the start to sort of catch up with the pace of the lecturer, because well, it's new material, it's a new environment, it's a new style of teaching and learning, and it might be hard to adapt to this mode like straight away. So I would suppose it is, well, you sort of have to like mentally prepare yourself to be thrown away by this very high speed of information getting thrown at you. But then as you get used to it, you'll sort of develop a learning habit where you will look back at your notes, and perhaps if you have any questions, you might first ask your friends, ask your supervisor, and if you really still don't get it, you might, well, I don't know, go online and look for more help. So I was probably, my advice to this will probably be mentally prepare yourself to the idea that university learning is not really what you might expect compared to like school learning.
Okay, I think that's an important point, that there is an academic transition as well as a social transition that comes along with going to university. Right, we have 1 more minute. Does anybody have any final thoughts on that question? If not, we can proceed to the evaluation. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, could I just talk a bit about support that is available, because I also struggle quite a lot with this transition. I got quite bad homesick, and I just want to say there's a lot of college support that's available. So for example, tutor, who's there to provide pastoral care, is always there to sort of listen if you have any problems, or if you're feeling a bit down. And then obviously you've got lots of friends around you that are there to help you as well. We have director of studies, who's mainly there to provide academic support, but my boss is quite happy to, if I have a trouble or problem, she's always there to listen. And then on top of that, we also have university-wide support system. So there are plenty of support available to help you transition into university life, and everyone really wants you to enjoy university life here. So I wouldn't say you don't have to worry about that. I got through it as well. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's a really good note to end on, and just to note that those structures that you described, there are similar available at other universities as well. It's not just unique to Cambridge. Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much to our 5 lovely panelists who have given their time to share their experiences. It's been fantastic. I just want to point out we've got some upcoming sessions. So week commencing 24th of March, we've got another lecture series week. So look out for the links to those in our newsletter. That'll be coming out tomorrow. And then module 3, choosing a topic for the HE Plus project. Those sessions are coming up on the 1st and 3rd of April. Thank you for spending an hour with us this evening. I've just got a short evaluation survey for you to complete before you go. So if you could scan the QR code, it will take you literally 5 seconds. All we'd like to know is what we did well and what we could improve for the next cohort. So I'm just going to leave that on the screen for a minute so that everybody's got a chance to scan it. And then you can go and enjoy your evening. Thank you very much for attending. Okay, fantastic. I think that will be enough time. I'm going to end the webinar there. Thank you again, our lovely panel.